Right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the CPO Perspective, where we have the opportunity to chat to chief procurement officers and leaders of procurement all around the world in different industries to understand what their take is on what's going on, what matters, what do we need to think about. And I'm delighted to welcome an old colleague of mine, Stephen Day, to this episode. Stephen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Hello there. It's Steve Day here from Kantar. It's a market research data analytics company. We've been owned by Bain Capital since 2019. So we've been through the journey of exiting from a mothership, standing up ourselves as an independent business, and then subsequently going through the process of transformation and now coming to the kind of what private equity call value realization or exit. So that's the journey.
Got it. Okay. Well, obviously, you and I are both young men in our 30s. I'm not even going to try and bluff that with anyone. You've had a good journey to get to where you are today. Do you want to just share a little bit about how you started, how you got into procurement, and how you got here?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, without making this sound like a very long biography, just a few kind of salient points. So you might detect in my accent, I grew up in the Midlands, and in fact, the city I was born in is Coventry. So for you eagle-eyed football supporters,
Friday
Coventry are
night.
finally back in the Premier League after 21 years, which I'm very thrilled about. And but the heritage of Coventry is really as a manufacturing city, and I was very fortunate to start my career at Rolls-Royce Aerospace. And an interesting story, I was 16 and I had the opportunity to go and go and spend a week in a factory in Coventry at the time called Parkside, very famous historical location at the time. And I spent a week with the what was called the materials manager at the time. And but what we might describe today as procurement. And got sat in and kind of listened to what they were talking about and all those kind of things. And I put a smile on people's faces because back in those days, there was an executive lounge for lunch, and you went there and it was like waitress service and all those kind of things. I thought, oh my goodness me, I'd love a bit of this. 16 at the time. I have to tell you that subsequently that's never happened. All of those perks were retired pretty quickly.
Now you're down to Tupperware and sandwiches like the rest of us, eh?
That's indeed right. And but anyway, I went on and did a degree at Coventry University, and very fortuitously, Rolls-Royce offered me a sponsorship as part of my degree. So I then joined a factory that was just outside Coventry at the time, and the function was called Factory Supplies and Services, and basically it was feeding the factory with all of the materials it needed for its manufacturing. Well, long story short, really it's where I learned kind of everything about managing people, because you used to have these hairy-assed production superintendents, which were like gods breathing down your neck about kind of where were the materials for the weekend or for the night shifts and all that kind of stuff. And there you are frantically negotiating with suppliers to get deliveries in and all those kind of things. So that's basically my foundational roots, as it were. And then kind of went through a number of roles in procurement, and then did a master's degree at Birmingham University. Again, 20 years ago, was a big debate between Andrew Cox at Birmingham University and Lamming, who I think was at Bath. And basically one was articulating lean supply chain, and the other was articulating dynamics, empowering the supply chain, all those kind of things. Anyway, long story short, I did that master's degree, did it, got sponsored, and the company I was working for at the time was Nortel Networks, again a company that was very almost like the Silicon Valley Google at the time, building out the network infrastructure for the internet. And I got my master's degree, as you do, and then you're kind of knocking at the door saying, what's your promotion? And they said, well, actually, we're just about to downsize the organization. So I went for a job interview as the head of supply chain with what was then T-Mobile, became One-to-One, then became T-Mobile, then became Everything Everywhere. And imagine, so I go to this interview and I'm going for a head of supply chain now. And again, procurement and supply chain sometimes get mixed up. In my mind, they're two very distinct functions. One's about buying goods, one's about the physical logistics of goods. Understand I did my degree, and everything I'd done so far was buying. I convinced these guys that I could run a supply chain, and I'd never really done it
With
before.
procurement, you can turn your hand to anything.
Well, and so it was. So I ended up. What I realised is the people who were interviewing me knew even less than I did. So at kind of very early 30s, I ended up running this kind of supply chain,
Right.
and again, it was a fabulous experience. And it was again, you wanted things about lessons and advice, and one of the early advice I'd give everybody is you got to evolve your career, and you've got to push yourself into completely new areas pretty quickly on, because I think that's always given me a very broad breadth of my career. Anyway, just fast forward, then I worked for a great business leader called Liliana Solomon. She then went to Vodafone Romania, so she asked me if I wanted to go and work there for 4 years, which I did. Then had a bit of a tour of duty with Vodafone through the UK, and then ultimately Luxembourg with a guy called Detlef Schultz. And then spin forward, then went into publishing with Pearson, trying to help evolve their physical supply chain. And then I've landed at Kantar. So, lots of industry sector breadth, I suppose, and then simultaneously lots of procurement and lots of supply chain experience as well.
Do you know, and look, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think, that, if you like, that meandering route,
Yeah,
and it seems to be a common thing that procurement leaders tend to either have one of two profiles. They're either man or boy, girl or woman, one career, one through a vertical in an industry and keep going. But actually, by far the majority have done what you've done. They've interspersed different industries, different kinds of role. There's a bit of academic mixed in, and it just seems to be that procurement is a broad skill set, and
yeah,
actually it benefits from gaining experience from how different industries approach it. One company's direct is another company's indirect,
yeah.
and
That's right. That's right.
and it's the same category, but you experience completely different attitudes from business stakeholders
Yes,
depending on which side of the fence it's on, right?
yes,
And
yes.
I think that's only beneficial. So look, let's come to the nub. I mean, you've had a wonderful career, still going, broad experience from aerospace, publishing, telecoms, obviously now market intelligence. What's on your mind at the moment as a procurement leader? I mean, what is it that you're looking at today and either thinking this is great or this is not so great? I mean, what is it that's bouncing around in there at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's what we're doing. It's the April the 14th today. So I'm sure people might think, well, kind of what's going on in the Middle East is top of mind. I mean, it is in the sense that obviously it's again headwinds towards
Yeah,
Kantar's revenue, not from a supply chain perspective, because basically with technology and services,
yeah, right,
I dare say this may have some impact in terms of client commitment, all those kind of
yeah,
things.
yeah.
Just as I think a lot of us were thinking, oh my goodness me, could 2026 finally be the year that we break out, of COVID, inflation, Trump,
Ukraine.
the Ukraine, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
all of this
I
kicked off.
know
So it
you can't.
feels like we've gone back in reverse again. So that's naturally fatiguing for everybody. Um, but if I kind of bubble it up to kind of a more broader perspective right now, I mean, obviously AI is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. I think if you're familiar with the Gartner model, there's this kind of hyper loop,
Yeah,
and then it much falls into I think they call it the doom of despondency before
yeah,
it
something
begins
like
to,
that, isn't it?
yeah,
It's
before it begins to start picking up.
excitement, hate,
Yeah, yeah,
despair, and then you finally
yeah.
get to a sensible level at the
That's
end of
right.
it. Right?
That's
Yeah,
right. That's right. And I think what you've got to do is understand where some of the um, amplification is, and what does it really mean. So you hear a lot about people like Nvidia and uh, the chat and agent infrastructure and all
yeah,
those
yeah.
kind of things. I think
Hmm.
what you got to understand is there's an enormous amount of pre-investment going in
Mhm.
anticipation of what people like you and I and the folks on the call will be able to do with AI. And I think you have to dismember that a little bit, because certainly it's not helpful, because sometimes you've got your investors breathing down your neck saying, well, we'd like the valuations of Nvidia. Well, I'm sure we all would, but the simple truth is what they're really laying out is the infrastructure and the pipe work that's needed for what we're going to do in the future. And what we're doing at Kantar is, and it's taken some time to process this, but I think we are now deploying agents in a couple of really subtle areas. One of the areas that I think we've struggled with is, obviously there's really two parts of what we do if you think about procurement. One part is the sourcing and the contracting of
Yeah.
demand.
Yeah.
And then secondly, the execution of demand through your P2P systems and processes and all those kind of things. And what I've realized is that actually the intimacy between what you source and how you pay for it allows a lot of value leakage to erode. And what we've therefore done is deployed agents that have taken what we've negotiated, which is typically static rate cards, and allowed that to become very dynamic rate cards through agents, so that people can source that by describing their requirements via an agent, and that agent will then pull all of that data, and it kind of locks down and it knocks out the requisition, then eventually the purchase order, in a very formulaic way. So that's very, very exciting. We went live on that on the 7th of April. Volumes are trending up. And what we're hoping to do is deliver another kind of value turn. So that, in the moment, divorce the infrastructure conversation between what we can actually do with it. And then what I think, if I look back now at my time at Kantar, so beginning of April with my 7th year, which is a pretty long time, by the way, for a private equity role. But again, if people are familiar with private equity right now, we're in an extended hold period because of all of the headwinds that have gone on over the past couple of years. I think that had I had foresight of this technology in my early tenure at Kantar, probably I would have gone a lot harder, a lot quicker, because I think the technology and the capabilities do allow you to drive value a lot quicker than historically has been the case. Say for one thing, Richard, I think what we've got to do in procurement is we've got to own data more than we have done historically. I think we've always seen it as like, well, that's the role of the IT department, or that's the role of somebody else. But the supplier data, the sourcing data, we need to own.
I had two questions in mind, because I mean, look, lots of organizations are moving towards AI, and particularly agentic AI, at different speeds. And there are lots of reasons for that. Attitude to risk, technology maturity. But for me, there are two things that are bundled with it. And you've mentioned one of them, which is, you're absolutely right. Data is foundational, and anybody who believes that you can bring in any kind of technology without actually sorting out the data that it sits on, I believe, is deluded. And I've been through the experience in a past life, funnily enough, at Rolls-Royce, of having to implement something that was already in motion, and the data simply undermined it at every single turn. So I think I agree fully. The bit that I just wanted to explore, because, as you press ahead with technology, what are you observing with the people in your team and the way that people and agentic AI are interacting? What have you seen so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because that, through the profession now, there's a lot of conversations that are being provoked about, well, what does that mean about the future skill set? And that you've got either, and I must say, it's either one or the other. It's kind of a doom loop, or it's actually quite optimistic. Now, the doom loop would be, if I, at the start of this, I kind of said my foundational experience was expediting, picking up the phone, getting the hairdryer treatment from a production superintendent. Are those experiences going to be available to the next generation of procurement people coming up?
Well,
Probably not. Okay.
No.
One view would say, oh, so that's quite bad then, because that means they're not going to build up those behavioral skills and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's true. But then, 150 years ago, everybody in London was riding horses. And I'm sure at the same time they said, well, what's going to happen to all these people that are grooming horses and all that kind of stuff? So people, technology and evolution means that what was relevant at the beginning of my career probably won't be relevant in the future. I think we need to remind ourselves that sometimes when we say, what about the next generation, we're doing that through the lens of our own experience. And sometimes we need to remind ourselves about that. But I'm more optimistic. I mean, I think what we do need from a procurement perspective is, firstly, I think you still need to know the kind of basic foundations. I think that the skills that will never change is the ability to, well, as you said yourself, for a profession, how that profession works across many industries and many companies is very, very different. So that it all hinges on your skills and your interpersonal skills and your ability to manage the business. But I think what we've got to do is we've got to equip our workforce to understand that AI, well, you from your career, Richard, is a force multiplier. We've got to get people familiar with the technology. We've got to get people, I think, familiar with this concept of prompt language and
Yes.
prompt learning. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
particular skill, even I'm doing that at the moment. I'm using Copilot to help me navigate prompt language and
Yeah. Yeah.
prompt training and all those kind of things. They're skills that we need to pick up. I think we've got to encourage people to play with the technology. I mean, there's 4 or 5 agents you can use these days. Quite an interesting little thing to do is actually ask the same prompt of the 5 or 6 different agents.
Absolutely.
Again, you get some very fascinating replies. And again, I think that's important because you got to imagine that all of these agents are basically going out. This is why they're consuming so much energy. They're going out across millions of websites and crawling. It's the phrase they use, crawling and collating data and then bringing it back to people like us. And I think you've got to get a sense of how they are thinking programmatically, because that should be thinking about data. And then the final thing that I think is just good for us all is, AI agentic agents at the moment are coming up with a point of view. They're not necessarily coming up with the answer, particularly in an open world. My agents that I'm using are purposefully programmed to come up with an answer that relates to the sourcing activity that
Your
we've done.
data.
So you
Yeah.
could call that like a closed agent.
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
using an open agent, give me a point of view on the best piece of software to perform this solution. You've got to understand that the way in which it harnesses and collates that information, it can only ever be a point of view. And I think the skills that we've got to really finesse is that we've got to intersect that point of view with several other points of view, to kind of get some authenticity.
I think this is a great perspective because if I look at it, I worry about, I suppose, 3 things, and you've touched on 2. And the first of them is people aren't being trained how to use AI. There's kind of an assumption that they know how to use it, but actually they don't. And understanding prompt engineering, understanding how to avoid hallucination, knowing when you should or shouldn't trust the answer and when to go and get an independent opinion. I mean, those are skills, and we have to teach people to give them confidence. I think the second thing that that comes quite closely with it, and you mentioned this right at the beginning, is there's an enormous push from investors and leadership teams for the adoption of AI because the benefits are perceived and they're being talked about. And I think that the risk is that the desire to get the benefits and therefore push AI to teams when you don't at the same time invest in their training, or as you
Yeah,
say, even just give
yeah,
them time to play,
yeah,
you end up with a double whammy of forcing people to use things ever more quickly, but with ever less
yeah,
ability to be
yeah,
confident in doing it. But there's a third bit, and again, you've touched on it. It's what I call the craftsman and apprentice problem, which is, you know, as junior jobs or repetitive jobs, transactional jobs, procure to pay, people should not be involved in procure to pay, unless it's troubleshooting something that's just gone completely off piste. Procure to pay is a perfect use case for AI. It has been for a long time with RPA, and AI is just taking it to another level. But as those junior jobs go, we talk about it like it was just a thing, but actually I believe it's kind of important. You and I are both products of all of those different jobs, all of those different firefights, problems, discussions, angry stakeholders, difficult suppliers. They've all made us what we are. And we have resilience and a coping mechanism because we've been through it. And I'm with you completely. I'm very relaxed about, Gen Z, Gen Alpha coming into the workplace. Much greater comfort with technology. I think they'll do an increasingly better job than, millennials, Gen X. But I think their Achilles heel is the interpersonal skills, the resilience, the ability to, sit down and take a coffee with stakeholders and, build relationships, but also to be able to exercise judgment over what they're getting from AI and from automation. I mean, you and I could look at something and say, that just doesn't smell right. There's just no way on the planet that's correct. How do you, what's your reflection on how are we going to solve this, craftsman apprentice when there are no apprentice jobs problem while still getting the benefit from tech?
Well, first and foremost, I have 4 children. Two are in the workforce, haven't recently completed degrees. The third is doing a degree at the moment. My 2 daughters that are working, are learning the skills of resilience through their career. So I'm actually, very optimistic. I think that though we worry a little bit about resilience, but I think that, we won't have any problem there. And I might also say my 2 daughters as well are in the workforce. Um, I'm a passionate advocate for their success, not only as a father, but also as someone that really believes in diversity. Have to say that some of the things they share with me, I kind of shaking my head thinking, bloody hell, it feels like sometimes we've not really advanced the cause of diversity. So that's still a battle that's not been fought. I think the answer to your second point is what we've got to do is just encourage people to be curious. And I think that's a word that sounds a little bit patronizing, and it's not meant to be. But
no, I don't think it is. I don't think it is.
But I think certainly Bain Capital talk about what they call a learning culture, a growth mentality. What they talk about. And initially, I thought of growth, then talk about revenue and EBITDA and all that kind of stuff. But actually, it's a little bit more subtle than that. It's like every opportunity or every new project you come across is a growth opportunity. It's an ability for you to grow your skills, grow your chops, as the Americans would say, learn new things, and all that kind of stuff. And I think our role as leaders is to create as many of those growth opportunities in our cohort and our workforce, because that's where they're going to get the most learning. I think it's still true that there was a piece of work that was done a couple of years ago that said that, I think 80% of all learning is done on the job. And you've got the academic experience, of course, and what you might do at college or university, but there's nothing like kind of having to deal with stakeholders in person, having to actually do the job. And that's where I think the majority of the learnings come from. So I think, we've got to encourage everybody to be curious. Got to definitely create the opportunity for this growth mindset. And I think also, again, and the final one I'd say, and this is always difficult, is we've just got to let people explore and make mistakes. And again, there's a lot of people will say, got to make mistakes, make a cock up, and then you absolutely blow up all over somebody, and it's almost like, oh my God, you create fear. So I'm only too aware of, you say take risks and all this kind of stuff, and then it goes wrong, and normally there's like a court of inquiry, and who you're going to blame for it and things like that. But again, I think as leaders, we've got to just encourage everybody to be explorative and kind of try new things, because otherwise, there's a danger that your thinking becomes very static.
I love that. Well, look, what a lovely way to bring things to a case. So, look, if you were going to offer one piece of advice to someone who's just stepping out on their procurement journey, what would that be?
Well, I mean, the problem is there's it's very difficult because there's so many things. But the one thing that I think I have has helped me in my career, and and it's not anything to do with work. It's just about having personal interests. So I'm like a phenomenal historian. I love anything to do with history. Always looking to. I mean, I'm seeing William Dalrymple in a couple of weeks' time in Guildford. I've just read a lot about the uh, the East India Company, all that kind of stuff. I think what keeps me centered, and I think it's very much linked to that kind of growth and learning mentality, is constantly exploring history and um, modern politics and all those kind of things. So if there was one piece of advice, it's to kind of make sure as you go through your career, you try and reserve a bit of brain space to pursue your interests, whether that's sport, whether it's hobbies, all those kind of things, because I just think it's just such an invaluable way of just enriching your life beyond just work.
Steve, wonderful. Thank you. And look, thank you for sharing your career, your experience, your observations. And I think this idea of balance and actually agile, being able to try stuff and fail and have the space to explore while always being curious, I think is wonderful advice for anyone in our profession
Yeah.
to enjoy it. So on that note, look, Steve, thank you ever so much for joining us. And look, you're welcome. And look, if you're out there and you're watching, if you want to participate, please just drop me a line. As always, we welcome your comments, and there are many more episodes of CPO Perspective coming. But for now, from myself and Steve, thank you very much, and goodbye.